Good morning, everybody. Ça va bien? Ça vous fait? Bien, bonjour. I'm just telling you in different languages. Hello, good morning. First of all, I want to thank the organizer, and specifically Lao Shi, Kinchi, Jad, and the team, and the students, very kind students. The theme suggested this morning is decolonizing the mind beyond nationalism and globalization. And I will try to give some idea to share with you. For decades, faced with the impossibility of leaving the colonial structure, the peoples, victim of the ideology of domination, question the forces that allow such a multifarious ideology to continue to fight them, and the reason why colonialism, which should largely be a question of the past, continues to impose its diktats, even if it is draped in clothes that look more human. These people are trying to identify elements that can change the paradigm of domination, as globalization continues to hurl its domineering and suffocating tentacles over the whole of the world. It strangles the peoples while maintaining them in an increasingly greater precariousness. It deepens inequalities between those who dominate and those who are dominated. It reduces private and public liberties in order to better satisfy its liberal objective. Globalization controls minds, summoning them to refer to a single thought, which is refined by most of the media. The capitalist organization is based on the belief that there is a prioritization of races and cultures, and with the strong idea that the European civilization is superior to any other, promotes the permanence of coloniality in social relations, international relations, institutions and minds. Ultimately, almost 50 years after the independence, one can say that if colonialism no longer exists under its brutal forms, and saying that I am almost sure I am wrong, coloniality has never disappeared from the minds of the people, and particularly of those who dominate and organize the world with regard to their own interests. Colonialism was illustrated mainly by a continuous series of massacres, village fires, hostage-taking, organizing famines, theft of land, and other crimes against humanity. Pure violence, cynically justified by the obligation to bring peace to a country, by the obligation of industrialized country to help via their transnational firms to exploit natural resources not belonging to them, by the so-called lack of democracy to which Western countries are particularly attached. Colonialism is endowed with unstoppable means to force its allies and partisans to struggle against their inclination to care more about their people than the market. To achieve this, it imposed a binary vision of the world, to adhere to the liberal value of the perception of the human, and to apply the principle enacted by a Eurocentrism reinforced by the ideology of modernity, or to declare oneself an enemy of this conception and to become the object of attacks in rule of the supporter of the liberal capitalist order. Toussaint Louverture, Lumumba, Sankara, and how many others have paid the price. The crimes committed in the name of colonialism are immeasurable. In the 19th century, the European colony, where were they settled by theft and crimes, were the theater of experimentation, of total wars, of extermination that will become the norm in the 20th and are still in the 21st century. To understand how A civilization that claimed to be enlightened and affirming to be concerned with human in its part of humanity was able to produce such monstrosity as the massacre of Herero committed by Germany in Namibia 1904, the massacre of Madagascar 1947, Sétif, Algeria 1945 by France, that of the Second War committed by Europe, and how many more, including Iraq and its millions of deaths, intervention justified by a lie, as it was the case in Libya, and that taking place more than 6 years in Syria. Not forgetting Palestine, a victim of the colonial policy assumed since 1948 by the international community and its multilateral system, which functioned only in its unilaterality, namely in the dominant-dominated relationship. Thus, to understand well how this perception of the world has been organized, we must face what has been put in place so that millions of men, women, and children are torn from their own continent, exported as a furniture, and sold as such good in lands illegally discovered by the first settler from the 14th century, and which was taken off between the 16th and 19th century. We are forced to return to the metaphysical and demographic catastrophes that were what are known as the Great Discovery, or Les Grandes Découvertes, 1492, that decided that indigeneity and blackness were declared as non-human values. Indigeneity and darkness are its intrinsic element of coloniality. Also, there are other forms of human differentiation that also play a role in its formation, including sexuality and gender. Aníbal Quijano points out that coloniality is, I quote, a naked ideological construct which literally has nothing to do with the biological structure of the human race and everything to do with the history of power relation in capitalist, colonial, modern, and Eurocentric world, end quote. A metaphysical catastrophe because the revolutions that were the découverte or great discovery of the Americas involved a collapse of the edifice of intersubjectivity, of the sense of alterity, and a distortion of the meaning of humanity. In this order, the master do not only seek to exploit the enslaved, but as Frantz Fanon remarks, the master considers them as inessential. And their objective is to eliminate them, to humiliate them, and if they cannot succeed, to violate them. It was justified the greatest, like that it was justified the greatest genocide that was a systematic extermination of indigenous people and the greatest crimes against humanity committed against millions of people exported and reduced to enslavement. Demographic disaster at this discovery have served as a foundation for other forms of catastrophe. As a result, in context marked by racial violence and colonial dispossession, humanity is still not a common and shared condition, it's a privilege. This means that exceptional action and modes of behavior that were exposed in colonial wartime become part of the natural way of behaving towards newly discovered and enslaved people. This has been applied to other peoples who have been classified under the same paradigm, and that is still what it is in action today. What the white European world has imposed as a civilization to the America made possible without any legal justification, the worst action against non-Christian people living outside the European realms. But moreover, this mode of behavior used in time of war led to the naturalization of the war, since extreme violence and constant low-level violence coexist and are directed against colonized population and their descendants. Thus, women and men are treated at once like an exploitable resource that one can select, evaluate, eliminate, and like a commodity that one can throw away or replace, just as it was done during the time of the transatlantic slave trade, enslavement, and colonialism. This compels us to look at and to understand the nature of the social structure in which people live. At the time of the disappearance of the socialist bloc and still more after the imperial war waged in Iraq and Afghanistan, substantive change concerning international legal and political regulation occurred. International law constructed after World War II has seen a widespread degradation that has a direct impact over the domestic law of state, especially over that which concerns the exercise of the power of government. The multilateral system thinks of the human, but without ever taking into account the experience of the inhuman. That is to say, the unworthy condition in which are held to live most of the people of the global south and the racialized population of the north, but also the obligation of the inhuman condition in which certain states oblige certain citizens to live. To fully understand this point, we must go back to the ideology of human rights that are the reflection of a Christian conception of the person. This aspect is present in the Declaration of Independence of the United States, 1777, which marks the triumph of liberal ideas, but also in the French Declaration of the Human and Citizen Rights, 1789, which aims at the search of the happiness of the citizen and is described with respect for divine transcendence. These two declarations reveal their increasingly white hegemonic idea of the human. If the principle of equality, to which it is constantly referring, is part of the Christian heritage, it should be noted that at this time it concerns neither women nor enslaved people, still governed by the Code Noir edicted by Colbert and applied with some variation in the United States. It may be added that the census suffrage was reserved for the richest. Despite these flagrant inequalities, the grip of the Declaration of the Human and Citizen Rights was such that it served as the basis for the drafting of the first French Constitution, but also as a model for many formerly colonized countries. Still today, the state of Senegal, in its preamble, mentions the Declaration of the Human and Citizen Rights. And to others at the end of the Second World War, and especially to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which mark the irruption of the individual and his right in the interstate sphere. This Universal Declaration, too, is limited by Christianity and adopted in the aftermath of the genocide of 6 million people, which has paralyzed the Western world rocked by the Enlightenment. How then to think that this declaration aims at the emancipation of human, since it has been produced from a place where it has been possible to commit for the second time a catastrophe against the human that continues a crime starts with enslavement without ever repairing the grave violation done to humanity. To not repair the crimes against humanity of enslavement, to not repair the genocide committed against the peoples living in the so-called uninhabited land, allow to guarantee nascent capitalism the political and legal framework it needed by organizing impunity after certain crime committed by states. For the Second World War, it was necessary to repair because it was the crimes committed against the white people, and thus to recognize that the victim was white. With regard to enslavement, if the enslaved was recognized by the master as a tool of production, then by the former master as a precarious worker, he never got to be recognized. That's what a reparation process has to look for, because it's, as Frantz Fanon points out, to break the infernal circle, which refers the other to oneself and to restore to the other, through mediation and recognition, his human reality different from his natural reality. If the Western concept of the human being has always been contested, and especially after independence, we must question the analysis of human rights from the point of view of the coloniality of power, knowledge, and being, in order to redefine the meaning of human, in which the theme liberation and disalienation occupy a central political place and a non-distal and moral place as in the Eurocentric perception. It is also one of the objectives of a legal process of reparation. At first, while there may be much to be gained by discussing human rights and the dominant Western idea of the human to understand colonization, we must not forget the decolonial turning point. In the process of the reparation, there is an urgent need for the colonized person to appear not only as a questioner, but also as an embodied being who seeks to become an agent of transformation, and mainly social transformation. The legal process of reparation must therefore support two fundamental dimensions of the decolonial turn: the identification of colonialism as a fundamental problem, never questioned by the dominant, but also by the dominated, and the idea of decolonization as a continuous and unfinished project. It is a position that implies not only a radical questioning of the superiority of Europe, but also introduce radical doubt about the lack of full humanity of the colonized. This is what the reparation process must allow to challenge the Western hegemonic concept of human and calls for a new definition of humanity based on the practice of the colonized to revise and rethink fundamentally the premise of Christian understanding of humanity. Through the process of reparation, the damned will emerge as a subject of speech, writing, and creation, but it is not an individual project, it is a collective project, aspiring to build what Fanon calls a world of few. This is what Frantz Fanon has hidden in Black Skin, White Masks, where he invites to walk towards a new humanism. He continued to carry this requirement in the Watchers of the Earth, where he calls the people of the South to set up a new man. Reparation are the time to consider the become human as a struggle against the night body of democracy. I quote Achille Mbembe when he speaks about in Politics of Enmity, namely its imperialist, racist, and colonial side, which follow it as a shadow. This approach must open the way for the human, in short, to be collectively extracted from this zone of non-being. The reparations are also a refounding moment to understand that the world can only change if the researchers begin to question. It is also a moment to deconstruct the belief that racialized people are incapable of love and understanding, and above all, to give. The reparation process must restore the claim of dignity and the militant charge that so often is missing. This process must be one of the aspects of the decolonial socialist Pan-African project, to which will be added a new humanism that will be able to think of the de-alienated and liberated human. The context of reparation makes it necessary to return to the question of the human, which has been left out of existence for too long. The reparation process must enable the consequences of the ideology of colonialism to be analyzed and identified, for them to be politically questioned. One of them is their writing and a mystification of history, and by the expression of a racism that strikes with full force those who are its victims. Race, I quote, as the mode and result of modern colonial domination has continued to invest every field of capitalist power, and racism, as Frantz Fanon highlights, has become, quote, I quote, the most visible, most everyday item to be honest, all at times the coarsest element of a given structure, end quote, and weighs heavily on the identity construction of individuals. Reparation process must allow to move away from the racial assignment which, in contemporary societies, is already real, such that the category no longer leads to stigmatization, nor domination, nor the perpetuation of social, economic, and political inequality, at a time when ontological hierarchies aim to irreparably differentiate individuals in order to better exploit them, and particularly within a climate of rising xenophobia and social fragmentation. In this respect, the notion of domination is useful. It insists upon power relation and not on identity relation in the treatment of contemporary ethnic and cultural conflict. It does not make reference to essentialized identity, but to historically and politically assigned social condition, together with a strategy of emancipation associated with this condition. We must therefore tackle the structure of domination to which this condition refers. It is in this context that racism as an element of the given structure is built, with the ideological superstructure of the state nurturing exclusion through essentialist stigmatization. Anything that can divide, destroy the social fabric, assign people to a single community, is then surreptitiously refined in official discourses. Add to this the construction of the representation of the diversity of organized group, as Etienne Balibar made clear, in a relation of master and slave, or more simply between civilization declared incompatible. Previously, there were civilizations that were superior to others. Now there are incompatible civilizations, and particularly targeted at African continent, people of African descent, but also the religion of Islam. In the name of that incompatibility, one part of the world is subject to widespread poverty and to the plundering of its natural resources. The only way to achieve an human society is not to turn a blind eye to this construction, but to dare to seize them in order to deconstruct them, reveal their arbitrariness, and their hidden discriminating effect. With a view to their transformation, there will be no recognition of the tragedy of the transatlantic trade slave, of enslavement and of colonization, except under the condition that all those who have died on this tragic history are restored in the whole of their fundamental rights as human. Thank you.